Hello, and welcome to an introduction to FSC and the new national standard. This is a good place to start your introduction to forest management planning and FSC certification if you don't already have a background in this area. My name is Alina, and I'm a biologist intern with Wakatoan. My background is in wildlife biology, and until I started my internship a few months ago, I didn't know anything about FSC. So today, I'm going to do my best to give a brief introduction to FSC and the principles of the new national standard, for those of us who are totally new to these concepts. I'm going to begin this presentation by giving some background information on FSC, what FSC does, and how companies get FSC certified. Next, we'll look at the new national standard, what it is, how it's structured, and some of the language it uses. Then I'll briefly introduce each of the 10 principles of the standard, which you can learn more about in future presentations. Lastly, I'll summarize how the 10 principles fit into the Canadian context, and provide some other resources that you can use to learn more about FSC and forest management. FSC stands for Forest Stewardship Council, an international nonprofit organization founded in 1993. FSC sets standards for what is a responsibly managed forest, both environmentally and socially. Forest operations that meet the FSC standards and are approved by certification bodies may then use the FSC label on their products, allowing consumers to choose products that they can trust come from responsibly managed forests. It's important to note that FSC certification is entirely voluntary. The only companies that get audited against these standards are those that choose to undergo certification. So if a company does want to be FSC certified, how do they do that? Well, as we've established, FSC puts forth standards for forest management that a company must meet to be FSC certified. If a forestry company wants to be FSC certified, they sign up for a voluntary audit process. But FSC doesn't audit companies directly. Instead, another organization, known as a certification body, uses the standards set by FSC to conduct audits. If the certification body finds that the company meets the requirements of the FSC standard, they recommend that the company be granted an Fsc certificate. Once a company is FSC certified, the FSC logo can be applied to wood and paper products from their forest, signaling to consumers that the materials in their products are responsibly sourced. Note that once a company is FSC certified, annual audits will take place to verify that they are continuing to maintain compliance with the FSC standards. On June 3, 2019, FSC Canada launched a new National Forest Management Standard, replacing and updating the 4 existing regional standards in Canada. The new standard came into effect January 1, 2020, and certificate holders have until the end of the phase-in period, June 30, 2021, to implement any changes necessary to meet the new requirements, at which point auditors must hold them to the new standard. Some general terms have very specific meanings in FSC context, which are important to understand before diving into the standard. The organization refers specifically to the person or entity applying for or holding certification, responsible for demonstrating compliance with the standard. Management unit refers to the spatial area submitted for FSC certification with clearly defined boundaries. And management activities include all processes, procedures, and operations associated with managing a forest, including planning, harvesting, monitoring, and reporting. The standard is structured around 10 principles, which you can think of as the essential elements of forest stewardship. For example, Principle 2 of the standard deals with the rights and well-being of workers. Within each principle, there are many criteria. A criterion under Principle 2 is whether the organization promotes gender equality within their company. Principles and criteria are set at the international level. They're the same everywhere in the world. Lastly, each criterion has one or more indicators, which are the specific direction an organization must follow, the level at which audits are done. An indicator that the organization must meet to show that they do promote gender equality is that maternity and paternity leave is available for no less than 6 weeks after childbirth, with no penalties associated with taking it. Now, let's go over all 10 principles of the FSC New National Standard. Principle 1. Compliance with laws. This principle requires that the organization follows the law, as well as all applicable regulations, treaties, conventions, and agreements. A full list of all the laws that an organization is required to comply with in order to meet the minimum requirements of this principle is available on the FSC Canada website. Principle 2. Workers' rights and employment conditions. The goal of this principle is that the social and economic well-being of workers is maintained or enhanced by the organization. It includes requirements for health and safety regulations, gender equality, training, and dispute resolution mechanisms. Principle 3. Indigenous peoples' rights. This principle requires that the organization identify and uphold Indigenous peoples' rights of ownership, use, and management of land, territories, and resources. Note that in this context, rights includes both legal rights and customary rights of Indigenous peoples, meaning rights that result from a habitual repetition of a behavior over a long period of time. Principle 4. Community relations. The goal of this principle is that the organization contributes to maintaining or enhancing social and economic well-being of local communities, for example, by providing reasonable opportunities for employment and training within the community. Principle 5. Benefits from the forest. This principle requires that the organization efficiently manage the products and services of the forest in order to maintain or enhance long-term economic, social, and environmental benefits, for instance, by harvesting at a sustainable level. Principle 6. Environmental values and impacts. This principle requires that the organization maintain, conserve, and/or restore ecosystem services and environmental values of the forest, and avoid, repair, or mitigate negative environmental impacts. It includes requirements to protect species at risk and their habitat, and to add to the conservation area network through designated conservation lands and protected areas. Principle 7. Management planning. The organization must have an appropriate management plan that will be implemented and kept up to date based on monitoring in order to promote adaptive management. Adaptive management is a system of learning from the outcomes of existing measures in order to continually improve management policies and practices.
Management planning is closely linked to Principle 8, monitoring and assessment. The organization must demonstrate that the impact of management activities, the condition of the forest, and their progress in meeting management objectives are all being monitored and evaluated in order to implement adaptive management. There's flexibility around what system an organization uses for monitoring, so long as the monitoring system allows for adaptive management, is consistent and replicable over time, and suitable for identifying risks and any unacceptable impacts of management activities. This is how monitoring can improve the management plan over time.
Principle 9. High conservation values. This principle requires that the organization maintains or enhances the high conservation values in the management unit through the precautionary approach. The precautionary approach means that action is taken to prevent management activities from harming people or the environment, even when information on the extent or likelihood of that harm is limited or incomplete. There are 6 different categories of HCVs, including both ecosystem and cultural values. To learn about each category of high conservation value, see the HCV webinar developed as part of the series by my colleague Isabel. Principle 10. Implementation of management activities. Management activities undertaken by the organization must be consistent with the organization's economic, environmental, and social policies and objectives, and in compliance with the standard. This principle includes requirements for how the organization regenerates harvested sites, how the organization uses silviculture methods such as fertilizer and herbicides, and how waste is disposed of.
While the 10 principles of the new national standard are set at the international level, each country has a different context into which they must fit. In Canada, that includes our ecological, regulatory, land tenure, Indigenous, and social landscapes. The 10 principles of the standard form a network within this context, connected by the values that they protect. Hopefully, this slide helps you to visualize the FSC New National Standard as a whole, prior to diving more deeply into the principles and tools that you will learn more about in future presentations.
To learn more about FSC and forest management, see the other webinars that have been recorded as part of this series, including a presentation on high conservation values, related to Principle 9 of the standard, and one on herbicide alternatives, both developed by our project forester, Isabel Allen. Thank you for listening. I hope this presentation has been a useful introduction to FSC and the new national standard.